Hello and welcome to the Powerful Personal Brand Podcast, where my guests and I share tips and tricks to inspire you to build a great personal brand, to increase your visibility and authority. I am your host, Claire Bahn, and on today's episode, I'm so excited to be joined by Brett Trainor. Brett is a CEO, podcast host, investor, business coach who has more than 25 years of sales experience in marketing, sales, and customer service. He now works with entrepreneurs and business owners to overcome challenges and take their businesses to the next level. Although he primarily works with established startups who are looking to get to the next level, he also works with early stage startups and large and global corporations. Brett, thank you so much for being here.
Well, Claire, thank you very much. I may have to borrow that intro for future.
You're like, wow, that was me. Yeah. So I was on your podcast last year and I was like, I really want to talk to you because I feel like we had such a great conversation. And I feel like what makes a great podcast are the conversations. Agreed. So you and I kind of work with some similar people. And there's some picadillos, shall we say, with some people, and we're, dealing with scaling and their brand and marketing and things like that. So I felt like we would be able to talk so much about it. So one of the things, I was looking at the notes that you sent. Why is content no longer an option?
Again, part of that is learning from you, because right when I had you on the podcast, you're the first person that I was aware of talking about content and the personal brand. And, up until then, it was the influencer and all that type of stuff. Yeah. And the deeper I got into it and working with these companies, it was the organic search. It was the content, the value add when people are trying to find you. That Facebook ads right out of the box and transactional type stuff just doesn't work anymore, right? Especially on the B2B side, people have got so much smarter or more sophisticated as buyers, and those tactics just didn't work. And so if you and I have a conversation, they go to my website and there's nothing there, nothing validates what we've talked about. So yeah, I jumped on that. Content you have to, right? Especially as a small company.
Yeah. I mean, and so I know that I struggle with clients, that they don't understand, like, building a brand is not an overnight thing. It does take time. It's a compounding effect. Like, how do you deal with sometimes people are going, but it's taking a while?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think because it is the long game, and that's one thing I've accepted, that this isn't going to be a 3-month or a 6-month or 12 months. There's some tactics you can use to help accelerate it. But it's really about starting to build that foundation. And one of the things I need to get better at is actually the call to actions, right? Because I have 175 episodes of the podcast and a bunch of content, but I need to get better at getting people to take action with what I'm doing. And so there's always that learning curve. But one of the interesting things, and now I'm going to draw a blank of which guest it was talking about, instead of paid ads, like in LinkedIn and some of the personal content, it's more paid organic. Right? Say, hey, here's a checklist that you could use. Right? Reach out to me if you have any questions. So it's much less about building the transaction, but adding value from a paid. So I don't do a whole lot of paid yet. That could be down the road, but I know that it still comes back to the value added content, right?
Right. No, whenever I feel like every experience I have, I always kind of layer that extra little bit of learning experience into that. And when I was running ads, one of the things I was doing YouTube ads, this was last year, and there's a little stat called view through. So it means that literally they see it, they open up a new tab, and what do? Probably Google you.
Oh, interesting.
So,
okay.
So yeah, so you're, that's one of the biggest things that people don't understand. They're like, well, no, I'm going to start out and I'm going to, do some ads. And you're like, okay, what's going to happen when they jump off the page and they do their research? Because it's going to happen. I actually had somebody on last week, and we were talking about how a lot of people go out to their communities to ask, like, who would you recommend for this, this, and this? Again, I'm using myself as an example. When I find, someone says, okay, these are the top 5 people. Great. Thank you. Now I'm going to do my research. It's not like I don't trust those people, but you still want to know. I mean, you still want to find out what you find out. So the brand is always so important. And that's the one thing that people just don't understand. And it's,
I was just going to piggyback up, and it's the personal side of it, right? I don't know if you've talked to Marty Sanchez, but he runs a little shop called, God bless it. I'm just, I'll send it to you, put it in the show notes. But what stuck out with me with that interview is he's talked about the rise of the inbound CEO, right? So if you're the CEO or running a small, large organization, you have to be the face of it anymore. I mean, you probably have some tactics to how you can get around it, but people want to buy from people. And the more you're out there, right, whether I guess you could put it in writing or podcasts or video, wherever you're more comfortable, people want to know who the voice is behind the brand. And I think it's interesting where it's going. And like I said, you're probably living it every day with folks, but like I said, I think, we're all becoming our own individual media companies, whether we like it or not. Yeah. And the sooner we start doing it, I mean, I think you'll agree with this, that it's not too late, right? We're still so early in the start of this game that if you can start now, you're still going to be well ahead of the game.
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you start a YouTube channel now, I've seen people that are doing exceptionally well that started last year. You have to figure out what you're really good at and do that. You have to have a strategy. You just can't wing it. I mean, you may be able to wing it if you know people that can, there's plenty of ways to jump in front, whether it's tons of ads or knowing somebody and that kind of thing. But one of the things that I did want to ask you is that how do you see company branding and executive personal branding evolving? Like this, we were just touching on that. I want to dig into that a little deeper. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on, I think for any size company, like unless you're running enterprise where you're a large company, I think even a mid-market, your customers are going to want to know who's leading this company. And I think the values of that brand or you, hopefully it's the authentic you, because it's really hard to pretend to be somebody else on all channels all the time and have it be consistent. So I don't think I think whether you like it or not, it's going to be part of the job. And I think getting that team around you, which it took me a long time to do because I was doing everything myself forever. And I recently started bringing in some help and started to figure out how to better leverage some of the things that I'm doing. And to be honest with you, when I started this, I was not comfortable. People are like, you have a podcast, right? They can't get over the fact. And, it was one of those, when I first hit record, which is 3 years ago, it took me probably 3 months to hit record for the first time. And I still hate listening to old interviews. I'm not even old. I could go back 2 weeks and still be uncomfortable listening to it. But it's the only way you're going to get better. So I think right now, part of it is what do I do with all this content, right? How do I optimize for it that I have it? So I'm sure there's, like I said, better ways for me to do things and take advantage of it. So that's kind of where I'm at.
As long as you're learning and you're open, that's the biggest thing. It's when you kind of shut down, you don't want to listen to experts and you don't, that's when you'll stop learning, you'll stop growing, you'll stop getting better.
Yeah.
And one of the things, because people sometimes are just like, Claire, you're really good on camera.
And you do have a great radio voice too. So you got camera and the voice going.
But I was an actress and my job was to audition in front of people every day, 5 auditions a day, every day. That was my job. It's funny because sometimes people, I felt like auditioning was my job because that's what I did consistently every day. And then you would sometimes win by getting an actual job, but it wasn't like you were doing that every single day. So, that you have to do it over and over. And one of the biggest things with acting coaches is I recorded myself. I always saw what I looked like on camera. I worked on not having strange things that I do, right? Sometimes I still do. I use my hands and things like that, but, it just makes you think about what you're doing. So because you were saying, well, I don't like to look at the old ones. And if you're talking to somebody who's just scared to jump in, just jump in, just do it. There's no reason to stop doing it. And the people that are really good at it will bounce higher. So work at it, get better at it, because when you're really good on camera and you are giving great information, that's what's going to kind of make you go up. And yeah, it's such a crazy. So when you're working with startup people, do they understand that they need to, is that kind of a hard thing? Because they're like, sometimes I find startup people, they're so in the weeds in their business and trying to get traction, right? That's like the big thing that everyone wants to know. What's your traction? What's your traction? And do you find that sometimes they're like, oh, I don't want to work on my personal brand?
I would say 95%, right? Don't want to do it. Or they want to write an article or be a guest on one podcast or come on your podcast twice or something like that, and then be done with it. And I just tell it, you're just creating a longer road for yourself, because if you don't have, everything's digital, whether we like it or not. And, I came from a sales world a long time ago where you could actually you can still influence sales, but outreach, you could go get business. Really hard to do that, right? People are coming for the content. What are the value? And I think one of the things that just getting started is it's okay to give away your good stuff. That took a long time for me to get over, because I'm like, why do I want to give my good stuff? Then they'll steal it. No, what I found is most people aren't do-it-yourselfers, and the do-it-yourselfers were never going to buy from you anyway. So you might as well give it to them anyhow. So,
and they're going to have to listen to all 300 of your podcasts or whatever it is, right? You're like, have fun. Yeah, it's there.
Exactly. And so, I think it is, like I said, folks like you that are out there evangelizing this and getting out and say the personal brand is not just for, TV or ads. It's your business. Separating the personal from the business is going to be really hard. Or I guess maybe the better way to think about it is you want it to be personal as part of your brand, because people buy. I think the more human the brand is, the more likely you are for business, especially in the world, that I'm working on. You had mentioned that I moved into the kind of the 0 to 10 and even more recently into the freelancer world, right? Because I believe, one, that all freelancers view themselves as business owners, right? But they left a corporate job. Usually they're doing some sort of service. The stats show that the majority of them, more like 90%, aren't making 100,000 in revenue, which again, you don't have to, you're freelancing for a reason. But if you're trying to build that freedom and flexibility, you've got to create that personal brand around that service that you're doing. So I almost...
Well, you don't have to, but if you don't, you're going to have a much harder time.
Yes.
And the people that are going to succeed much faster and maybe reach higher levels than you. So you don't have to, you just realize that you probably won't reach the height that other people in your market are that are doing personal branding.
And you're going to have to work harder, right? Because you're going to have to convince more people, because your content can convince people to work with you, right? Because I'll meet somebody on LinkedIn and it's like, I see your content all the time on LinkedIn. I'm like, I'm sorry about that. He's like, no, it's good. But again, it's just to reinforce that, this guy's out there talking about these things. Oh, he's talked to Claire about, the personal branding. So, it's not only what I know, I get to learn from you and the different guests that are coming on. And you mentioned earlier, I'll always be learning. And, I think I re-engaged with that about 3 years ago. And it's just not, in the world we're living in, you have to, because it's changing so quickly right now.
I feel like it's funny because I come up, I don't know, I'm always like taking little notes for a future book, right? So I'm like coming up with like little things that I thought of this idea. And so one of the things that I thought about, and I was in Chicago with some clients, and they are a private equity firm. So trying to make a private equity firm sexy. That's right.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I was saying, when you started your very first job, like right out of college, maybe your boss was a baby boomer, or, and like, there was just the way that they did this stuff. Right. And the baby boomers and like maybe the older Gen Xers maybe those were the target market, right? Because they were in that sweet spot of like, 20 something to 35 or whatever. So as the people are growing out of that, now we're in millennials and like the Gen Zs are coming up, but some of the people who are still at the top have forgotten who their target market is. They're still doing the same marketing they learned when they were 21 in their first job. And you're like, your target market has changed. You're not marketing to the people that are retired. You're marketing to these people that are now making decisions,
right?
Whether they're your same age, a little bit older than you, or younger than you. That's who you need to market to. And so it's funny because I said something about like being, like the younger Gen Xers in this. And he's like, oh no, am I an older Gen Xer or a younger Gen Xer in this? I go, you missed the whole point.
Right.
But
yeah.
But it was just like this thing of, they'll always be learning, but you have to objectively look. In marketing, you have to be objective. And it's often a really good thing to have people on the outside to say, okay, objectively, this is what you're doing right. This is what you're doing wrong. This is how we should change it. Because there's really no other way to do that. And you have to have strategy. Otherwise, you're just kind of like, I hope this works.
And they say hope's not a strategy, right? So it's...
yeah, I know.
No.
Well, so... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to finish with that, right? Because, one of the things that I spent a lot of time on the enterprise side with the B2B is the buyers and how that was changing and how people buy. Now all these buyers are in their 20s and early 30s. Everything's off the mobile device, right? And they're looking to validate. They're getting recommendations from their friends. They're going to look it up. And again, what we talked about, they're going back to look to see, are you the person that everybody said it is? And is there content and validation behind it? So even if the company you're selling, I don't even care what the product is anymore, more and more buyers are going to be in their 20s and 30s because people are retiring and moving on. And these are now entry-level jobs in some cases. So it's, like I said, it took me a while to realize that the world had completely changed and content is, like I said, it's not optional anymore. And again, I think we can wrap our heads around marketing and Facebook ads and writing good copy, but one of the things that I still struggle with, and I had a former management consulting colleague tell me all the time, he's like, Brett, done is better than perfect. So,
that was going to lead me to my next question about perfectionism, because I know that that's one of the things that you talk about. So what role does perfectionism have in building, your brand, your business, everything?
Yeah. And I think it's because I could write this just a little bit better. Or, to be honest with you, where I struggle with, where do I start the story when I start to write blog posts, right? Do I go back to the beginning, or do I save what I think is a really good blog post for a specific time? And there's other folks that are just stream of consciousness, that they're writing as they go and as they think. And I still over-index to the side of perfection, of not doing it. Just getting back to your point, get it out there. It's going to get better. Measure it to see what's working. One of the things I've definitely found with my content is I have no idea what's going to resonate and what's not. Where I thought I knew what a good piece of content was, and it does okay on LinkedIn or Medium in those cases, where I thought, and then others that I'm like, oh, that was kind of a throwaway post, but it's doing well. So if you've got any suggestions on how to and where, I do think the personal side of the content does a lot better. And again, that's not scientific by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, I feel like most of what I've learned is kind of the hard way. I started a lot of this stuff. Like I used to have a gluten-free food show on my YouTube channel. Go check them out. They're still there. And I just did whatever I wanted. And some of my favorite recipes didn't do well. But once I started kind of saying, okay, what do people want to know? And I created content around that did well. And then I could also layer in stuff I wanted to do. So it can't be what you want to do, because your personal brand isn't for you, it's for your audience.
Right.
So if you're creating your content that your audience wants, and go figure out what people are searching for. Plenty of sites where you can see what people are actually searching for. That's what you need to be creating content. I often will find conversations like this, other podcasts, clients, that all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to do a podcast on this subject. I am going to do a post or a blog on this subject, because if my client has this question, if my client is struggling with this, if someone I'm speaking to is struggling with this, this is a real issue, and someone else is struggling with it too. So you could just randomly find something that works, but usually finding something that kind of trends is better.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. And I think the other mistake a lot of my clients make is they want to talk about themselves, features and benefits and these things. And that doesn't work either.
Nobody cares.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. Nobody cares.
And it's really hard for someone to hear.
Yeah.
It's hard. Nobody cares. They don't. So, you can layer in some of these other little things. But to be a CEO, to be successful, you have to have a thicker skin. So if this is hard for you, get over it. Get over it.
Yeah. And
you've got to get over it. Shake it off. Get over it. Like, I just feel like everyone's always just kind of like struggling, and they struggle to move forward. I don't know. My mom used to have a saying, you have a pity party for 15 minutes. After that, get over it.
Move on. It's time. Yeah. Right.
Move on.
No,
so what? Somebody hurt your feelings. Get over it. So that's the thing. It's that people, we have to tell people the hard things.
Hard things.
And if you're going to hire an expert and they don't tell you the hard thing, they're probably not a good expert.
Try not the right experts to be working with.
You've got to have somebody. Yeah. You need somebody that's just going to tell you really what it is.
Yeah.
Perfectionism isn't serving you. So what's one of the biggest misperceptions that your clients have about branding?
I think it's that they can influence it. And I'm maybe not saying that the right way, but the clients are going to have their perception of your brand. And there's not much you can do to control it. You can put the content out there, you can engage with folks, but at the end of the day, and I forget who told me that the customer's perception of your brand, or that's what your brand is. It's your customer's perception of you and your company. And you can't tell people what your brand is, right? You can work and do, and your actions are going to speak louder than words. But I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is, hey, we got a really good widget and a feature, and we do this better than anybody else. And I'll tell people, different is better than better 100% of the time, because how do you convince somebody that yours is better? Unless it's like 10x better, you can demonstrate that this is a next generation, but very rarely is our products or services that much better than the competition. So how do you find what's different about it? And how do you tell that story a little bit different? And coming from a non-marketing side, that's been an evolution for me as well, to start thinking more to your point on what's the customer, but what are the stories and why are you different? And I think probably the last thing I would go back to on that would be, think about it. It's not the solution, it's the problem you're solving. And I think too often, more in the startup space, I think founders fall in love with the solution and not falling in love with solving the problem, because over time it may change how you solve that problem. But if you're focused and your customers know this is the problem that you solve, they're going to come to you because they know that's what you do. And like I said, I think go look at a ton of brands and figure out what is the problem they're solving. I'd have no idea. Right. So,
yeah. Well, I think also usually a lot of startups start because they solved a problem that they were having, the founder or their founder saw this issue and said, I can invent that, or I can do that. And so that's kind of how you can share your story to solve the problem, instead of just going, but I did this thing and it's so great, you should buy it.
To your point, nobody cares.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares. And it's the hard truth and the hard reality. And people just need to understand that. And then it'll be okay.
Yeah.
So what are the biggest challenges that you find that your clients are facing?
I think I think there's two. So on the lower end of the smaller companies, right, I tell them maximize your network, right? Because if you can't sell your product or your service into your network, it's going to be really hard to sell it to somebody that doesn't know you or knows your product. So make sure you're doing everything you can to maximize that network. And then that's when the real fun starts, is when you try to expand beyond that network. And what I found historically is most don't make it, right? They don't get beyond that network. They get burned out. They don't know how to reach their ideal prospects, or their tactics don't work, and they just run out of time and money. And it's unfortunate, because I truly believe there's a ton of really good companies that don't make it just because of execution, not the idea. And this great tying all the way back to the content piece is that's where the content and the foundation is. You're working to maximize your network. That foundation is going to start to bring in other people that, I heard about this on a podcast. What do they do? And then slowly that organic is going to start to build. And that's the way you're going to scale, is with people that don't know you versus the people you do. And if you're fortunate enough to have a large network you can sell, you're going to grow a pretty good sized company, but most of us don't have that big of a network. And so that's where I really think that the content comes in, is to that next level.
Yeah. Someone that wanted me to do coaching with them, they listed like, these are the personal brands that I liked, and they listed Gary Vee. So I went down watch some of Gary Vee's reels, and one stuck out with me. He said, like, one of the biggest reasons why people don't succeed is the execution. And he was saying the reason I succeeded is because I was sharing everything. I was sharing my failures. I was sharing everything that I was doing, and people were just kind of like, oh, wow, you're an expert. And he's like, I am.
Right.
I became an expert because of things I was doing wrong and ways that I needed to make it work.
Right.
I needed my business to succeed. So I learned, I am a marketer. So I learned, okay, marketing is constantly changing. Every day there's like a new algorithmic update on Facebook, this and that. You have to keep up on them. At least our team does. So you have to constantly evolve. Like, I used to do this. I have to do that now. It's just the way it is. So many things in business, sales, like you've just got to evolve.
Yeah. Because the customers are and the buyers are, they don't care about your sales process. They don't care about your marketing, right? They've got a problem. They need to solve it. And if it's really hard to work with you, or they can't really tell what you do, it's going to be hard to do business with them. So I do think we really overcomplicate this sometimes. And again, one of the lessons I've learned more recently, and I've started to put it into my content, is just sharing what didn't work for me, right? Or what has worked for me as I'm going through this journey, building this business now, and say, hey, if it works for you, great, right? Or here's not what I didn't work, and just as a heads up. And I find people relate to that a little bit better than just coming out of a textbook or subject matter. So I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second, because I've got a question, because I do have quite a number of years of experience. And before I started doing the podcast, I would have told you I knew 90% about go-to-market, right? There's probably a few things but once I started interviewing folks like you and founders, I realized I probably knew 60%, maybe 70%, and everything was starting to change. So how do you communicate that to your buyers that, hey, I'm not just a person that's done it or worked with startups, but I'm working with experts to bring in the best practices? That's something I haven't figured out how to incorporate into my... You
don't tell them you do it.
Okay.
You just start sharing best practices.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So it's just that's the thing. It's just, a lot of people get into this thing of like, well, I did these great things and they're all in the past. Yes, they are all in the past. You can't do anything about it. You could just, I did this great thing 5 years ago. Okay. Yeah. Next.
No, right.
So you have to somehow figure out how to share that information to help someone today.
Makes sense.
That's it.
Do you think we overcomplicate it too, in the sense of, I guess, because the couple of years I spent management consulting, everything is like 3 levels deep, and you have to show your worth by the processes. And what I'm finding is this simple tends to work a little better.
I think because I have worked for myself. I mean, acting, you work for yourself. Like, you are your own boss.
Yeah.
You have to say, I'm going to take this acting class. I'm going to do this thing to better myself, right? So you are your own boss. So I've been my own boss so long that I forgot what it was like to have all these, cogs and, going these things and these barriers. So sometimes when I have to deal with a corporation, we have corporate clients, and I'm always just like, oh yeah, I forgot what this was like. So it just takes so much longer. So I just think, you have nothing to keep between you and your ideal client. Just go help.
Have conversations. The other thing that's kind of helped is I don't worry about it now if somebody doesn't want to do business with me, right? Because that took a while too. Like, oh, you work really, really hard and they're just not buying. But now I'm like, look, if it's not a great fit and we don't connect out of it, I'm okay with it. We'll move on. It's going to save us both a lot of time.
It's interesting because my team now kind of sees how difficult it is to work with, because every person on the team has a little bit of something that they do for that client. And yeah, it's like when we get to a point where like, we're probably going to have to fire this person, they're like, please. Sometimes it's so hard because they don't see what you're doing. They don't value what you're doing. They fight what you're doing.
Yes.
And it's when you have the clients, like we do we have clients that are fighting. They're pulling their numbers and everything they're doing down. So you're trying this to go like this, but they're bringing it down. And then you have the clients that leave you alone. And when you say, I need you to do this, they do it. So they are going like this. And then it's because they trust in the process.
Yeah.
You're going to hire someone, trust in the process, or don't hire them.
Such a good point. And
do your homework.
It is the process.
Go to an expert, trust them.
Follow the advice. And if it doesn't work for you, then you can make a change. But it's the corporate mentality can hurt you because you're kind of used to essentially ruling by committee, right? Right. There's not one person going to make the decision, or three people, or, right? So you on that out. It's like people,
all of these people need to, and then you have the politics involved, which may not make the right person come to the top. And so, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to deal with. Oh, the politics, right?
Yes.
Trying to make sure, CYA so that you didn't get fired.
Right. And like, life's too short. I mean, I'm happy to work with you, but it's harder. I mean, part of that's the qualification process too, right? But I do think your content can help tell that story as the type of customers that work best with you. And like I said, if they're going to fight it, it's going to be hard on both sides.
I actually had a client before he signed. I said, you have to have altruism in your heart. You have to want to give without asking for anything in return. If that's something that you can do and you can trust our process, we will work well together. He said, yes. He is the day one he fought me.
Oh, no kidding.
And you're like, I told you what it was going to be like.
Yeah.
I told you, and you fought me. It's like, I feel like sometimes people just don't listen.
They don't listen.
And they're like, I know that you're the expert and I know that your clients get results and I want all of that, but I also still want it my way.
Yeah. And you'd think,
what do you do when you have a client like that?
That happens. It doesn't happen as frequently because I do think I'm getting better at being able to kind of flush that out early. But, it's somebody brings you in. I'll give you an example. It was, I think they were probably about a $200 million company. Kind of went flat, but has had a good product, 20 years. It's owner led, right? So decent team, but small, but very impressive what they did, but things have gone flat. And so they brought me in to say, hey, what do we do with some of the sales, marketing, and basically gave different recommendations and said, hey, this is the way to do it. But if you decentralize it and have it run through this, it's just not efficient. It's not going to, at the end of the day, that's what he wanted to do, regardless of what I said. So, but I didn't fight that one as long as I would have in the past to try to really make him see what it is. It's either they're on board or they're not. And it's really, really hard to convince somebody otherwise. Yeah.
But the content and definitely in, our sales calls and stuff, the messaging is the same, altruism, giving, trust the process, blah, blah. Like you just have to do it. Sometimes they'll lie to you.
Right.
Obviously, some people will lie to you to work with you.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do.
No. And hopefully you can, like I said, kind of flush that out kind of early so it doesn't, because you're right. It can put a strain on the team if everybody's having a bad experience and nobody likes to work with it. And, it's just not worth it. So part of what I work with these businesses now is to say, hey, who do you really want to work with? Right. That's going to be part of it, because figure out who you want to work with and the type of work you want to do. Those are two critical pieces. Part of my journey was, the end of last year, actually middle of last year, I was in like 3 or 4 different engagements, and they're very different. And it really hit what I like to do, what I didn't like to do, and who I would like to work with. So I basically pivoted. That's why the podcast has kind of been now rebranded. My business has gone into a direction more in line with what I want to do, right? And I think I can add more value. But part of that, it was letting go of some of those businesses and clients that I know I could still add value, but it wasn't in alignment with what I was doing. So it's hard just to walk away, but.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things is like, if you learn from what worked and what didn't work, and you kind of are more, moving in that direction of what is working and what you enjoy, and you will have a better business. But ultimately, you're not going to be perfect. You are going to have a client that sucks from time to time. You're going to learn how not to get them again. And I think that's one of the biggest things that listeners, people watching can learn, is that you're not going to be perfect when you start out. It's fine. We both made mistakes and we had to learn. And that's just so you can't, I don't remember who said this, but I heard it once where it was like, you can't divine someone's success at the moment. Like when you see them, you don't know what led to that point, because you're just like, well, they're so successful. It looks like they just started. They're so young. They're my age. Why aren't I? Don't compare yourself. You don't know what led to that point. Just I think the thing that we've been talking about is just do it. Like, go for perfectionism and learn and grow. And you're going to, that's going to help your business grow.
And it's not, back to the point, it's not too late. And the one point you made that was interesting, that I tell, part of what my motivation to get out is, you see some of these content folks that are killing it. And some of it frustrates me, that the sky is blue, 300 likes. I'm like, yeah, that's not reality, right? It's good for them. They got to a point where that happens. But where I go back to folks is the 20 somethings that have big followings, that people look to them as subject matter experts, but they have zero experience. But guess what? They're out there, their content's out there, and nobody has an alternative. So when I look at folks like me, or folks with 15, 20 years of experience, you need to get your voice out there and share that wisdom and experience. Because if you don't, these less experienced people that may not be given the best advice are the ones that people are going to listen to, just for a lack of options. So, right.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes people don't kind of see that, because it feels like, oh, it feels so competitive. And I'm like, fine, then just help people.
I like it.
Fine. Whichever way you want to look at it. It's either competitive, or I just want to help people. Whichever, side of the coin you're on, just do it. Well, so I want to I love to give tips. So what 3 tips would you give, like, your ideal, someone that you're working with? What are 3 tips that you can give them to improve their businesses?
Yeah, start with the problem. Fall in love with solving the problem. And ideally, it's a need to solve problem, not a nice to solve problem, but you can work with either, but it makes it a little more difficult. Build and add value about how you solve that problem without selling. I mean, that's you'd sign up for that. That say, hey, here's the ways we've dealt with it. Here's ways some of our clients have solved it. And then third is just be visible, right? I think part of it, visible but not obnoxious. I think there's the point of posting 32 times and it's just not do it. But so I think one of my rules is, if you're going to post, make sure it adds value, right? And maybe I'll give you the fourth one is it's not self-serving. You cannot, to your point, just give, and it will come back to you. Karma is real. You help people, it's going to come back and they're going to help you. It may not seem like it overnight, but it does pay back. And I've seen it with the podcasts where I've got folks, business more just for coming on this show, right? Because somebody else had heard them that they hadn't do it. So, it's funny. I wish I would have taken this mindset much more literally. When the corporate world, it was harder to do that give, because everybody's fighting for the pie. But since then, God, my life is just so much better when I've taken that approach versus the uber competitive. I've got to do this because that person's doing that. It's no, man, how do I give? And if we can, I heard, it's a podcast called The Process. Paul Shirley, former NBA player, he talks about the process all the time. And he was talking about his book, that he wrote a book that was a pretty good seller, a second one that did pretty well, and then one that was his personal project. He's like, you know what? If 10 people read this book cover to cover, that's amazing when you think about it. We get so caught up in the vanity metrics and, maybe 1,000 people bought the book, but how many actually read it? But if 10 people read that thing cover to cover that didn't know you, that's amazing. And so I think that's what I need to remind myself a lot of the time is, hey, if we're helping one person, 2 people, 5 people, it's a good thing. Right?
Yeah. I think that one of the things is that, because when I've coached people one-on-one, there's always this thing of like, what's the ROI of my brand? When am I going to start making money? when am I going to make money? I'm like, okay, well, you're not going to make money if you go out there. That's like the desperate chick who really wants to get married, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, no one wants to date her or him, right?
Yeah.
So you can't go in there like that because you were talking about how like you can't change your perception. If you go out there like that, people will know and they're going to be like, ugh.
Yeah, no thanks.
I don't know. There's something off about that person and their personal brand.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just need to go out there and give. And that is going to be what really just attracts. And that will actually help people. But if you go in there, so you have to have something that makes money so that you can give and you're not stressed about when this ROI is going to kick in.
Right. And I think that's what you work towards, right? Because as you start to figure out who you want to work with, you may have to take some clients to pay the bills, but you want to work towards that future where it does, again, it's just such a better business and people and customers are happy and your business is going to grow much faster if that's the approach that you're taking with it. One last question for you on tips, and I struggle a little bit because we're taking a point in the sand, draw a line in the sand and say, hey, this is flat out wrong. I've just never been comfortable just saying, but it seems that you have to put a little bit of a personal lens or what you believe in to drive the business. I have, again, no scientific proof. So I'm just curious from your perspective, I know you want to have an opinion. You can't serve everybody, right? So you want to pick that niche that you're going after, but it's okay if it's not for you. I'm just curious your perspective on how hard-nosed or hard-lined you take that. That makes sense?
Well, so my co-founder will do a lot of the sales calls and things like that. And so sometimes when they get to me, so they came because of me and my personal brand and they talk to him and then maybe they come back to me. I'm the mean one.
Okay.
For lack of a better way. And I usually will say, listen, after I graduated from college, I went to New York City. I don't dance around a problem. I will go right to it. If I don't like you, I don't like you. I'll tell you I don't like you. I just really am like that. And so sometimes I just say, listen, I'm not trying to be abrupt. I'm very New York, but obviously you came here for a reason.
Right.
Because it's Claire Bahn Group. And that's who I am. Sometimes that's how I preface things. And usually sometimes it doesn't work, but maybe that they're not the right people.
Right.
But, for the most part, you just have to be truthful. A lot of times people won't be able to take it. And what I do find too is I have a good, I think about from an empathetic point of view. Okay. They're doing this, they're having this problem. Why? And so I kind of try to diagnose the problem and say, this is what I think is happening. Is this what's happening? So I almost kind of become a shrink. It's very strange.
Interesting.
But we literally had this client who was super successful and just torpedoed everything. It was like, oh my God, we can't do anything because you're so scared of moving forward. What are people going to think? Oh my God, 5 people commented. She was just so freaked about everything. And then it was a whole lot of imposter syndrome and whatever, but I was the only one, she was a woman. So I was able to really kind of dig through that.
Okay.
She just couldn't get over it. And we stopped working with her.
Okay.
She just couldn't get over it. But we would talk and she'd be like, you're right. Right. I feel like it's when Harry met Sally, you're right. I know you're right. But
nope.
Sometimes they can't move forward.
Yeah.
And there's no way there's nothing you can do. And, I actually talked to another coach who teaches. She kind of isn't a psychologist, but she tries to figure out what is wrong with the business because of what's in here.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so I'm I have such high achievers and CXOs and executives that I'm oh gosh, having them do essentially use your psychological evaluation. I can't really do that, but sometimes people really need to figure out what's causing problems in their life. And sometimes it's things it's what happened in their childhood or something like that. So that's what I have found.
No, I think
it's
that makes
not
sense.
You being truthful. It's that they can't handle it for whatever reason. It reminds them of their mean stepdad.
Right. No, that makes sense.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a weird thing because I joke with I have a couple women communities that I belong to. And we're always what is going on with some of these clients. And then we find out that, yeah, it's the imposter syndrome. It's whatever happened, childhood trauma last week. Like so sometimes you can't deal with, it just won't work.
There's nothing you can do.
I find it's better to be truthful.
Yeah.
Especially when it's your name and your company and what you're doing is on the line.
Which comes back to the point of being authentic, right? Be truthful to yourself. In the end, that's going to be much easier to maintain. And yeah, you're right. It's interesting. The other thing I find not troubling, where I used to be all about execution, right? So what is the process? We got leads coming, how do we do? But now I'm saying like 40% of these business owners are, what do you want, right? If you can't even define what you want, how are we going to drive your business to what that goal is? And to me, it used to seem that everybody knows what they want. No, they really don't, right? Until you sit down and make them write that down and say, not just financially, but why do you want that financially? Is it, I want to take off. I had a woman on the podcast, and she built a business around, she wants to be off every August, does not want to work in August to go climbing or do whatever she wants to do. And she built her business and does very well. And that's what I find. It's the owners that have actually identified what they want, write it down, and are moving towards it tend to move. It's the ones that are just kind of winging it. That doesn't work very well either. Some get away with it, right, and build and want, but man, it's funny how I'd say in the last 3 years, my appreciation for that has grown dramatically. So,
but I think also not necessarily like I'm going to define my goal and my goal is going to come to me. You have to be realistic with what it takes to get there.
Yes.
That's the thing too. Because if so this person that wants to be off in August, but they want to be a solopreneur, okay, that's not going to happen. You're probably going to have to hire some people.
Right.
So you have to realize, right? So you're going to have to hire good people. You probably have to take less salary. You have to know what it's going to entail. And because I've had people like clients come to me and they're like, well, I don't understand why I don't have paid speaking engagements after 2 months.
They should have listened to your podcast. Because we haven't established your authority yet.
That is where it came from. I want you to know I was speaking to that client.
That was awesome, by the way. That's when I just listened to the other day. So, but no, you're so right. It is about thinking. I do think you need to think big, right? Because one of my self-reflections I came across later in my career was I got very incrementally focused, right? Part of it was the corporate part is a little better, but where I've had the most success in my career is where I ask myself, why not? Why can't I run a bagel business? I don't know. You just go do it and you figure it out. You have to want to figure it out. You just can't go do it and it's going to magically happen.
Yeah.
But right. I think getting back to that, thinking bigger and asking more, maybe why not, works for me. And as I start to listen to other people, it seems to be that's a recurring theme is why can't we get to, 1 million downloads on this podcast, right? It's possible, but to your point, what's the work it's going to take to get it there? And are you sure that's really what you want as the end game with this? So it's fascinating. Though.
I know this has been so much fun, Brett. Oh my God. This has been such a great conversation. We'll have to do it again. So tell people, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, best place is probably LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes. Just Brett Trainor. The podcast has been rebranded. Love if anybody freelancers out there, they're stuck in their business, give it a listen. We're always happy to have more folks. Or just bretttrainor.com is the website. It can link you to everything else. So I always enjoy our conversation, Claire. This was awesome.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much, Brett. And thank you for listening and watching. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye.